human soul actually has. The human soul has. Okay. Start again? Okay. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وبعد. Welcome to the third episode of our series, The Empty Space. Today the episode is called The Stages. And I'll be talking today, inshallah, about the nafs, the soul. And the nafs, yesterday I gave a lot of different definitions, and the nafs is probably the most important aspect that we'll be talking about. And it's the target of tazkiyah, of purification and cleansing. And it's the target of change, really. So in order for us to change it, in order for us to purify it and to elevate its status, we need to understand it properly. So today I'll talk about a number of different aspects regarding the soul. The first aspect I want to talk about is the soul's nature or instincts. And today, through psychology and sociology and evolutionary biology, we know much more about the instincts of the human soul than we ever did before. And the scholars of Islam have talked about these instincts for many centuries as well. So I'm going to put them together for you so that, inshallah, they make some sense. The soul has two main goals that it wants to achieve for us. It wants for us to survive. It wants to keep you around for as long as possible. And it wants you to have as much joy and pleasure as possible. Those are the two goals that the human soul wants to achieve. Every human behavior, every human reflex, every instinct you feel that you have can be explained by these two goals that the soul is programmed to set out to achieve. From the first cell that ever existed, that was ever created, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put on this earth, that has been the goal of every soul. Every living thing wants to survive as long as possible and wants to find as much joy and pleasure as possible. Those are the two universal instincts and goals that every soul, every nafs wants to achieve. And when you think about them, they're not bad, are they? I mean, they're not evil goals for the nafs to have. It's just we're going to have to figure out a few. We have to work out a few details in order for it to actually be possible. So, if you understand those two basic goals that the nafs wants to achieve, then you understand why the nafs wants you to have more wealth. It wants you to have more connections. It wants you to have more social status. It wants you to have strength. It wants you to have more children, because all that, in its understanding, will allow you to survive longer. If you're stronger physically, if you're stronger financially, if you're stronger socially, if you have more children, that means you have more protection. That means you're going to live longer. That's why we want all these things. And the reason that we enjoy play and distraction and leisure and we're lazy, we don't want to put too much effort into anything, is because the nafs wants to find joy, wants to find pleasure. It wants to preserve its own energies. It doesn't want to do something difficult and hard, because that's going to spend a lot of energy, and that means you're going to be weaker and you won't last longer. That's how the nafs thinks. That's how the nafs focuses, and that's how it functions. Now let's give a few examples to understand what I'm trying to talk about. You remember when you were younger and your mother would make a bowl of food or something you liked, let's say French fries. Or falafel, in my example. Whenever they put that plate in front of you, depending on how many people were sitting around the table, you would always feel this fear, that there's not going to be enough, right? And you start looking at how much there is in the plate and how many people are sitting around. You have this urge to put your hand out and take as much as possible, right? That's a natural reflex. Now, why is it that that's what we feel that we want to do? It's not just hunger. You're hungry, that's fine. But why is it you have this urge that you want to snatch the first and most amount as possible? Because the nafs in its mind is, in order for you to stay ahead, in order for you to be the strongest you can be and survive as long as you can possibly survive, you have to eat the most. You have to eat more than everyone else. You have to make sure that you take what is yours first, and that's how you'll survive, and that's how you'll be strong, and that's how you'll find more joy and pleasure. The nafs is just looking out for you. Just wants to make sure that you're going to be fine, so it gives you this urge to take as much. Of course, if you behave based on that urge, it's going to be a problem. It looks really ugly. Children can do it, that's fine. If a 2-year-old does that, we're not going to hold a 2-year-old accountable for that, because 2-year-olds actually, they function purely on the urges and instincts of their nafs. And it's cute at this young age, but when you get older, it's not. But that's why we feel that way. It's because we want to get ahead, we want to survive. The nafs wants you to survive, so it makes you feel that you have to, it makes you worry about, is it going to be enough for me? Is it going to be empty by the time I get there? Are they going to eat more than they should? Am I going to get my portion properly? You can explain the same aspect of when people when someone looks at something that's haram. When we look at haram, especially for men, specifically for males, the reason that you do that is the nafs. The nafs has this thought, understanding that survival requires strength, and one of the elements of strength is not just money, wealth, which it wants you to always get, but also social support. So if you have more children, that means you have more strength. That means you're surviving more. And having children is a method of survival as well, because if you die, well, at least if you have children, they'll continue your legacy. So the nafs has males staring at females a lot with the hope that maybe you'll end up going and marrying or performing, even if it's haram, even if it's zina, because the nafs doesn't care. Having more children to offer you more strength. And that's why, that's from an instinctive perspective, if we're looking at your instinct, that's why men are tempted to look at, to stare at women and to look at haram. It's what their nafs is. The nafs thinks it's doing you a favor. It thinks it's strengthening you. Why? Well, because the nafs, there are three things the nafs doesn't differentiate between. See, the nafs doesn't care about halal or haram. Those two terms mean nothing to the nafs. They will never mean anything to it. So even as you're trying to purify your nafs and teach it, it will never really understand the concept of halal and haram. And I'll explain this more as we go along. It's meaningless to it. To us, as to your mind and to your spirit, it does. What Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded for us to do and commanded us not to do, that is meaningful. To the nafs, it doesn't care. Ethics and halal and haram, these are terms that don't exist in its vocabulary, so it will never ever urge you towards something or not urge you towards something else based on whether it's halal, haram, whether it's ethically acceptable, ethically unacceptable. It only functions based on those two major instincts that exist for it, those two goals. Help you survive and bring you joy. Nothing else to it is relevant. That's the first one. Second thing it doesn't understand. It doesn't understand long-term harm and planning. It doesn't understand boundaries. The nafs will make you overeat because food is energy. Energy means better chances of survival and strength. So eat. Just keep on eating. It doesn't understand that if you overeat, it's going to harm you. That's going to, in the long term, cause you cardiovascular problems and diabetes, and you'll be overweight and you can't move as well. It doesn't understand that. It doesn't understand it doesn't have a long-term plan for you. It's very short-sighted in nafs. It only understands right now. It's living in the moment, every moment, with two very clear goals that is set out to help you achieve at every given second. Every given second. That's exactly what it is. It doesn't understand long-term planning. It doesn't understand boundaries. It doesn't understand, okay, you've done this, that's enough of it. No, it'll keep. That's why people get addicted. That's why people get addicted. Because if the nafs understood long-term joy, long-term health and well-being, people wouldn't get addicted, but you do. Once someone tries a drug and finds a very short-term, concentrated level of joy, that's it. The nafs wants that every single day. It wants it all the time. Even if you explain, even if this is not going to be, it's not going to help in the long-term run of our happiness. Even though it may even cause your survival to be decreased, it doesn't understand that it can't look that far. It wants you to survive right now, and it wants you to have joy right now. It can't see long-term. It's very short-sighted. That's why it doesn't understand boundaries. That's why we have a high probably. That's why we are predisposed to be addicted as human beings. That's why it's such an important part of understanding ourselves, is why it is that we fall into addictions. And there's, of course, this is not by any means a series that is going to tackle that very complex and important subject, but I'm trying to open doors. This whole series, my goal is just to try and open the door Just try and set a direction. We have to start thinking about these things. We have to start talking about them. We have to start discussing because it's an extremely important part of our religion, our faith. And if we want to, advocate our mental well-being, then we have to start understanding our minds and our spirits and our souls and our consciousness and our consciences and how they work together. And we have to start working on them. We have to start figuring out if there are deficits or abnormalities or problems that need to be addressed that we can't fix on our own, that we need specialists to come and help us with. But if we don't talk about these issues, and these aren't issues of interest, then we'll never know. We'll never be able to actually deal with them. And I think that's why this is so important. And it's not that I decided it's important. This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decided was important. This is what the Quran talks about. Which is why I did an introduction episode where this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet ﷺ taught us, that this is something that you have to take care of all of your life. But we have chosen to not look at. Why? Because it's convenient for the nafs. It's funny how everything we do is convenient for our soul. The soul doesn't want to be purified, doesn't want to be changed, doesn't want to be forced to do something it doesn't want to. So it'll get you distracted. Distraction is a strong method the nafs uses, because if it keeps the brain distracted with video games and sports and other stuff, it doesn't have time to actually look at it. If the brain starts looking at the nafs with a critical eye, it'll say, you're not taking care of us very well, are you? We need to make some changes here. So the nafs doesn't want that. So keep it distracted. But that's, so the first one, just to go kind of recap here, the three things the nafs doesn't understand. Number one, doesn't understand halal and haram, doesn't understand ethics. Right and wrong, very, very weak grasp on that stuff. Second thing, doesn't understand long-term harm, long-term planning, doesn't understand boundaries. It's very short-sighted. Number three, the ends always justify the means for her. For the nafs, the end always justifies the mean, always. It doesn't care how you achieve what it wants you to achieve, as long as you achieve it, period. That's as simple as it is for it. That's why when you're sitting in front of food and it doesn't seem that there may be enough for everyone, it wants you to take it all. It doesn't care. It doesn't care how you get it. It wants more wealth. It will, you see something haram sitting, you see money sitting there that's not yours, the nafs will give you an urge, maybe you should take it. Maybe you should take, even though it's haram, even though that's not that's not how you make more wealth, it doesn't care. It doesn't care how you do it. And that's why if you look historically, the most evil human beings are the people who believed, even forget about the nafs urging them to do it, they actually turned it into their own philosophy that the ends always justify the means. And that is by far one of the worst statements that the human race has ever come up with. And it's one of the worst philosophies that has ever existed, and has caused endless suffering and death and agony and destruction. It all comes from a very simple aspect that the nafs doesn't understand certain things, because it's pre-programmed by its instinct, by the nature of how it is, to want to get two things. It wants to get your survival, it wants to get your joy, and that's it. It doesn't care how, it doesn't care what it takes, it doesn't care whether it's going to end up causing you pain later, it doesn't matter for it. And if you understand that, you can almost explain everything that happens, everything that we do, and why we do what we do. And I'll end with those examples, inshallah, but I'm pretty sure you can think of a lot of other examples yourself. The second thing I want to talk about today is halbun nafs, the interest of the nafs. Here's something that, as Muslims, we need to understand. This is very specific to us as Muslims. The nafs, the soul, based on what I just explained, will never do anything that doesn't have its self-interest in it. Based on what I explained to you, the conclusion we should be able to arrive at easily is that it'll never do anything that does not serve its self-interest. Because it only has two goals, and both of them are extremely self-serving. I want to survive, I want to feel joy. It won't do anything that doesn't serve those two goals, ever. The nafs will not allow you. It will fight you. It will claw you down. It will put everything it has to make sure that you don't do anything that is not going to serve one of these two goals. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows that. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows that we want to serve ourselves. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not ask us to stop wanting to serve ourselves. Actually, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to be extremely selfish. He wants you to to go along with your nafs in being extremely self-serving, to be the most self-serving, the most selfish individual on the planet. There's just a little niche to that. There's a little clause that you have to be aware of. You're going to serve yourself and be extremely selfish in terms of making it to Jannah in the Akhirah. Do not be selfless about that. Don't say, no, I'm selfless, and even when it comes to Jannah, I'll let you enter before me. No. Be selfless as much as you want in dunya. When it comes to Jannah, you better be the first person in line. There's a known story where Jabir ibn Abdullah, his father Abdullah ibn Hiram, and Jabir, they're one of the great Sahabas of the Ansar. There was only 2 men in the house. There were a bunch of younger sisters. The mother had passed away. So one of them had to stay home, and the other one was going to go for the Battle of Uhud. So Jabir is like, okay, I'm going. You're an old man. Stay with your daughters and I'll go. And Abdullah is like, no, I'm going. You stay with your sisters. And they actually argued. And it came to the point where they disagreed. And they had to flip a coin for it. And they flipped a coin, and Abdullah ibn Hiram got he called it. So he's preparing himself to go to the battle. And Jabir is crying because he's not going to be able to go with the Prophet ﷺ and be with the Sahaba. He missed Uhud. So Abdullah would say, Ya bunay, لو كانت غير الجنة لآثرتك بها. If it was anything besides Jannah, I would have put you ahead of myself. You're my son. Any money I have, I would like to offer to you. Any status I have, I want to give you. I'll give you my organs. I'll give you anything you want in dunya. But we're talking about akhirah here. We're talking about Jannah. I come first. Be extremely selfish when it comes to akhirah. And that's what Allah wants you to do. He just, look at how masterfully Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did this. He just made the path towards you being as selfish as you can ever be, the ultimate selfishness, which is entering Jannah, making sure that you go. In order for you to achieve that ultimate act of selfishness, you have to be selfless the whole way. سبحان من جعل خدمة الآخرين السبيل الوحيد لخدمة الذات. Exalted is the one who made the pathway to self-serve yourself ultimately filled with selfless service for others. That's the only way to make it. You want to achieve the highest level of joy and survival. Isn't that the two things that the nafs wants? It wants to survive. That's khulud. You're going to be in it eternal. You want joy? Jannah is only joy. Isn't that the ultimate satisfaction of the nafs in terms of what it wants? Yeah. You want to achieve that? You have to walk a long path of selfless service to other people. That's just how it is. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because He knows how the nafs works, it's just a matter now of explaining to the nafs, okay, we're going to get survival. You just have to start looking long term. It's just instead of being it's just a matter of time. When are we going to find that survival and joy? Now, or are we going to find it just a little bit later? It's going to be better, long term. وَالْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ وَأَبْقَى is much better. The equation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put for us is one that helps us actually convince the nafs that this is what we're going to do. The equation is, if you can either get joy in dunya, or no joy, and then akhirah, joy or punishment. Now, if you took punishment out, which is a lot, if I speak to a lot of people and they're always asking about it, if you took punishment out of the equation, then you leave the nafs with the following choices: either joy right now, or no joy right now, or postpone joy later. It may be nice. For the nafs, it's like, why? I don't know. Why? I don't know about later. I have something in my hand right now. In Arabic, they say, "Asfur bil yad wala ashra ash-shajara." You have a bird in your hand, or 10 that you're promised in a tree later. No. What you have right now, I have right now. Then I was like, well, if later there's only either joy or no joy, I don't know about later. I know right now, and I can achieve pleasure. I'll achieve pleasure right now. But then you tell the nafs, no, see, later it's either pleasure or punishment. There's no third ground. There's no, nothingness. There's either joy, either you get pleasure or you get punishment. And punishment is, the nafs wants to preserve you. It doesn't want you to be in pain. That's the opposite of being in pleasure. So if you tell the nafs that there's pain later, there's punishment, if you don't make choices right now, you have a better chance of being able to get it to do the right thing. If you take punishment out of the equation of dunya and akhirah, of life and afterlife, it doesn't work. It doesn't work regardless of what your nafs is like and what you are like. Because, I don't know what's going to... I'm told what's going to happen after death. I have high certainty in it. But it's so far down the road. You know what? I like the life. I like the life I'm living. I want to enjoy this life. You know what? I'm fine. I don't need to be eternal. I don't need to have joy later on. That's fine. I'll leave that for everyone else. I just want to enjoy life right now because that's what I have in my hand. It seems really interesting. I'm so excited about it. And people will make that choice. And if they made that choice, they wouldn't be insane to make it. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made the equation very, very easy. I mean, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not give us an equation or does not give us a scenario where, I'm not sure what to choose. No, the choice is very clear. Either pleasure later or punishment. Obviously what you're going to choose. Obviously you're going to choose pleasure. Now the beauty in the scenario that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put together is that in order for you to achieve that pleasure at the end, that ultimate manifestation of your selfishness, self-serving instinct, you have to walk a path of ease. I know you're thinking, no, you mean you have to walk a path of difficulty. No, you walk a path of ease. وَنُيَسِّرُكَ لِلْيُسْرَى وَمَا جَعَلَ عَلَيْكُمْ فِي الدِّينِ مِنْ حَرَجٍ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that this deen is the yusra, is the easiest of ease. He did not put within your faith, He did not make your faith based on haraj, on difficulty, not at all. Well then why can't I do it and I can't do that? It's not because these things are difficult. The haram list and the halal list or the wajibat, the obligatory list, aren't difficult. They're actually what's going to make you happy in this life. It's just that the nafs doesn't want to do them. That's all. It's not because, it's just the nafs, the soul doesn't want to do them. Why doesn't the soul want to do them? Because the soul, as I said, has two very clear goals that are extremely short-sighted, that don't have any long-term planning, with no ethics or values, and no understanding of what is right and wrong. That's why. The problem isn't the path that we're walking, isn't the ultimate goal that we're going to achieve. The problem is the soul. The soul has to change. It has to adjust itself. Which is why we're doing this. This is why we're talking about this issue. It's why the Quran came. وَيَتْلُو عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتِهِ وَيُزَكِّيهِمْ. You have to purify. قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ تَزَكَّى. You need to purify. Or else because the problem is not the road, the path. It's not extremely difficult. It's of ease. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told you, you want to achieve full ease, walk the path of ease that I gave you. And the path of difficulty, meaning, and the outcome or the consequence of punishment, you walk a path of difficulty. Yes, the nafs likes this one more than this one, but that's because it's messed up and needs to change. It's the issue of the soul being adjusted and being taught certain things. Why does the nafs want to walk a difficult path with a difficult outcome when we have a path of ease and an easy and a great outcome? It's because there's certain things that has to change about itself. That's why Adam alayhi salam was told, you need to leave paradise for a while. Go to the earth. Go learn about yourself. Go figure yourself out. If you can't prevent yourself from something that I told you was forbidden, even though I have provided everything for you, just don't touch this and you couldn't do it, that means you have to go and figure yourself out. You have to learn some self-control. You have to learn to purify that nafs and get it under your grasp, or else you're not worthy of being with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's all it is. That is I've summarized for you the whole point of creation, the point of the trials that we go through as human beings in a very simple way. And that's where the self-interest is important. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not want you to become completely selfless. He wants you to become completely selfish. Just on the way to achieving that level of selfishness, you need to learn to be selfless. In this dunya, just give others. Don't give, because why? It's like instead of filling your dunya bank account, you're filling your akhirah bank account. Just a matter of the nafs coming to that conviction, which is my third aspect of today's episode. The soul's convictions. The soul has instincts. Those instincts turned into convictions, beliefs, and those beliefs or convictions turn into values and ethics. I'm going to give you a few examples to understand what I mean. The instinct is, as I said, survival. Survival, the best chance of survival is being ahead. If you're ahead, if you have more money than everyone, if you have more resources than everybody, then you're more likely to survive than everyone else. That means That's the instinct, right? That's the instinct. I want to survive, I want to be the strongest, I want to be the best. That leads to a conviction that others being ahead of you is a negative thing. Others also succeeding and having a lot is a negative thing, because if there's someone else that's succeeding and is getting ahead, that means they're competing with you over strength and survival and resources, and the nafs doesn't want that. So other people succeeding becomes a negative thing, which leads to envy and arrogance. So envy and arrogance are just the result of a soul conviction, which is people getting ahead is a bad thing, that stems in an instinct of always wanting to be ahead. And the examples here are, there are many examples, but I'm going to give a few. These convictions can change. The nafs instincts can't change, but the convictions can change. And we don't want to destroy. We're not out, this whole series, we're not out to destroy the nafs. The nafs is our best ally. I mean, if you took away the nafs instincts, the instincts of the soul, the human race would have never survived. The child that screams in the middle of the night, the 3-month or 4-month-old child that's screaming in the middle of the night, why do you think it's doing that? Because it wants to eat. Well, it could wait until the morning. Yeah, no, it can't. It won't grow up as strong. It won't grow up as healthy if it didn't. That screaming child is functioning based on the instincts of its soul, but that's why it survives. That's why it grows up to become strong and healthy and capable. These instincts keep us alive. That flight and fright reflex that we have comes from the instincts of the nafs. It keeps us going. It allowed human beings to survive over hundreds of thousands of years, and that's why you and I sit here today. So it's not all evil, but we need to figure certain things out in order for us to be actually to be able to deal with it in a proper manner. Another conviction: in order for you to get ahead, in order for you to survive, you need to get ahead, which means that you should obtain as much as possible, be as successful as possible. That's the instinct. The conviction is self-value. The nafs gives you a conviction that you are worthy, that you are valuable. That's a good one. You need that. You imagine if you take that away? If you take self-value away, self-esteem away, then what do you end up with? You end up with people who struggle in life, who are constantly depressed, who are constantly struggling with low self-esteem. These are problems that require years of therapy and years of medication, and it's actually very difficult to deal with, and there's always such sad endings for these type of problems. It's not easy. We need that. You need the nafs to offer you that high self-esteem. What needs to change is the reason for it, the motive behind it. The perspective that allows it to exist. We don't want to take it away. We want to tell the nafs, no, we have no self-value. No, we do. Keep that. Just make sure that you understand why. The nafs you have to convince the nafs, the convictions have to change. Why is it that I'm valuable? Why is it that I have self-esteem? What's the reason? The nafs reasons are all wrong. They're just based on wanting you to continuously take more and more and have more and more and more, just so you survive longer and find more joy. But we want to change the conviction, or the conviction is different. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He talks about the nafs, He says, إِنَّ النَّفْسَ لَأَمَّارَةٌ بِالسُّوءِ إِلَّا مَا رَحِمَ رَبِّي. Indeed, the nafs will command evil, except the nafs that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has shown His compassion to, or mercy. Why does it command evil? Not because the actual concepts it has are evil, but because of the means that it's going to use to achieve these goals are evil. Because it doesn't care, as I said, about ethics or halal or haram or right or wrong or means. It doesn't care. It just wants the final conclusion. So yes, we need to hold on to self-value. That's important. But why? Why am I valuable? Where does my value come from? My value, I'm a servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. My value comes in obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. My value comes from the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saw enough in me, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala believes in me to the point that He offered me this chance to exist, to live, to prove myself. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave me a way of life, and that He's holding me accountable. He holds me accountable because He thinks that He knows that I am capable, that I can make decisions, that I can be a good person. That's where my value comes from. That's where self-value comes from. You don't want to get rid of the self-value. And you don't want to end the instincts. You just want to change the convictions. What it believes, you have to convince the nafs. The nafs is convincible. It's like a child. You can totally convince it and change its thoughts. You can't change its instinct. The nafs will never stop wanting to make you last longer. The nafs will never stop wanting to make you happy. And that's important. If that drive went away, then we wouldn't be here. No one would be here. There would be no point of life. Life would be meaningless and it would really go nowhere. So we can't change the nature most of the time. So the question becomes, well, why does someone lose their self-esteem completely? If you're telling us the nature doesn't change, right? You're telling the nature, then how is it that maybe someone ends up with no self-esteem? Because the conviction should be, I'm very valuable. That's the natural conviction that comes from the instinct of the nafs of wanting you to survive, is high self-esteem. Then why do we have low self-esteem? Because the conviction changed for those people. How does it change? It changes if you're abused, if you're mistreated, if you're continuously told that you're worthless and that you're never going to amount to anything. If you see no love or tenderness or hanan or kindness or no empathy and no affection growing up, that can cause it. If you go through enough difficulties in life without any resolution, if you're oppressed to the point where you lose track of your own integrity, the nafs starts being convinced that it's worthless. And that causes all the problems I talked about. And in our line of work, we see a lot of this stuff. You want to learn more? Talk to child psychiatrists or adolescent psychiatrists. Speak to them. They're a big asset in any community because they can tell you things. They can tell you things about upbringing, about raising your children, about what can happen if you don't do certain things properly and correctly, and how it can affect the soul. Maybe it's not the same terminology in terms of soul and spirit and all that. They'll tell you about the human condition. That if you take away self-esteem, it can happen. You think that it's impossible to happen because the instincts won't allow it. Yeah, but the nafs can be convinced. It can be swayed. It can be persuaded in one direction or the other. Which is why there are therapies that work. They're difficult because it's hard to convince the nafs. It takes a long time. It takes either it takes extreme conditions or a very, very gradual line of work. It takes years and years and years for it to change. That's why tazkiyah is not something that's going to happen now. You're not going to listen to this dars and walk away a completely different person. Neither am I. No one can. It takes time. It takes, you have to be very persistent. You have to continuously convince the nafs of and we'll talk about inshallah methodologies within the series of bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Or extreme circumstances. That's why people go through very difficult experiences that are very extreme, where there's loss or there's a lot of pain. It can harm the convictions of their souls, which leads to values that don't function as well. The instincts will say, but different convictions will change. And I hope I've been able to kind of make that clear, because that's what we're going to be working on. We're going to be trying to convince our souls. We're going to be telling our nafs. It's like you're doing personal therapy. You're explaining something to your nafs. No, this is what is right. And explain why by contemplating and thinking. Like I told you, that when you think about things and you contemplate them, what you're doing is you are sending a river of positive thoughts into the heart. And that heart is in this big mixing pot, is going to affect that cycle of thoughts and behaviors and feelings. And that's going to strengthen the spirit, that will strengthen the conscience, that will sway the nafs. It will change. It'll slowly change the direction of the nafs. The last segment of today's episode, I want to talk about the stages of change, just so you understand what we're looking at. The nafs, there are 4 basic stages. Depending on what books of tasawwuf you read or tazkiyah, you'll find different stages, and depending on what books of psychology you read, you may find some variations. So this is my breakdown of it. Inshallah, you'll find it beneficial, and it's pretty simple, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. The first stage is the default stage, full submission to your soul. Whatever it wants, we do. And that all animals on the planet live by that, and all children live like that. And that's fine. And anyone who doesn't have, and people who have mental retardation or mental, they're delayed in terms of their development, they will live in that stage because they just do whatever their instincts tell them to do. Whatever the soul loves that. It's having a ball. It will cause you. That's why children are extremely selfish. They're very greedy. They want everything for themselves. They want more. They want even what they don't need. Have you ever had a kid bring some chocolates or some fruit and give them one piece, take another piece, they'll start crying that you took one. Well, why? I mean, there's enough for all of us. It doesn't want you to have anything. It wants to, he or she, they want it all for themselves because they're functioning based on their instincts. That's all they know. And some people, unfortunately, some of us will grow up and continue to do that and submit completely to the instincts of the soul. What are the soul's desires called? I talked about this yesterday in the definition. It's called al-hawa. It's called, self-desires are called in Islam al-hawa. You have the instinct, you have the conviction, and then you have al-hawa. It turns into the desires, what I want. And if we don't make some changes, people will live all their lives just following their hawa. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talked about that in the Quran at least twice. أَفَرَأَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّخَذَ إِلَهَهُ هَوَاهُ وَأَضَلَّهُ اللَّهُ عَلَى عِلْمٍ. See the person who chose their self-desires to be their Lord, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala led them astray even though they have knowledge. Because knowledge is not going to fix it on its own. Other measures need to be taken in order for that to change. So that's the first stage. The first stage is just submission, full submission to the nafs. And I use the word submission because the opposite, that's one extreme that the pendulum swings to. And then the other one that we're looking towards, at the end of the line, is full submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? But full submission to the nafs is how we start out. And thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's how we start out, because that's what makes us survive. But you can't expect that to continue. Because the same example, if a child is crying because he didn't get all of the fruit or all of the chocolate or all of whatever is there, you think it's cute when they're 2 years old. It's not cute when they're 22. And there's something wrong, definitely, at that point, if someone's that level of selfish and that level of lacking ability to share. So there has to be some change. The second stage is the stage of ikrah, of forcing the nafs to do the right things. Your spirit is well nurtured and nourished growing up. You get a lot of love and a lot of affection and a lot of kindness and tenderness, and you see all the right ethics and you're fed all the right values. And you're taught, and your mind expands because you're learning a lot of experiences, so you're starting to figure out what is right and what is wrong. All of that is happening, and you have a good ability to make decisions, and your conscience is loud. You start doing things that your nafs doesn't want to do. And we do that all the time, by the way. This is not just specifically for acts that take you close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We do this all the time. In the form of studying, in the form of getting up in the morning and going to our jobs, in the form of doing errands and chores that we don't want to do. You see, when I say I don't want to do, why don't you want to do it? Isn't the right thing to do? Yes. Now, why don't you want to do it? I don't know. I'm lazy. Why are you lazy? It's not you. It's not you. It's your nafs. The soul is lazy. The soul doesn't want you to spend energy. That is not going to make you survive longer right now or give you pleasure and joy right now. So it tells you just sit back, do nothing. Sit back and do nothing. That's what the soul wants. In your mind, you're like, no, I should want to do this. Knowledge is great. Learning is awesome. This is going to give me status. It's going to give me clarity. It's nur. It's light in my head and my mind. Why don't I want to open this book and study? Because it's energy spending that the soul is too ignorant to understand is important for you in the long run. That's all it is. That's why if you can change that conviction that, my nafs, listen to me. This learning right now is going to make me very, very happy. Give me a lot of joy later on. I'm going to find a lot of pleasure from this. And it's going to help me survive. Because survival is not just living longer and having more children. Survival is leaving an impact, leaving a legacy. That's also survival. Once you convince the nafs of that, you're fine. If it can see that legacy is for survival is legacy of doing great things and leaving an impact rather than just living longer years and having more children, then you'll start to read with ease. That's why some people, they are addicted to reading, addicted to learning. They've been able to convince their nafs. Some people do, ikrah, they force the nafs when it comes to acts of worship. And that's okay. At the beginning, that's fine. If you're a young gentleman or a young lady, you don't want to pray, but you know it's the right thing, so you're forcing yourself to make wudu and to pray every day. That's a good thing. You should stick to that. That's the first step. But that step cannot last forever. Anything that is done under coercion, anything that you're forced to do, doesn't last. Experience and years of and history, it tells us that it doesn't last. If you do something that you don't want to do, it doesn't last. It will end. you can't keep doing it for too long. You'll get tired, you'll get bored, and you'll give up. Or you'll find ways to do it but not really do it. Where you stand there and but you're thinking about, food and falafel or some other thing that you're thinking about. You're not there because you don't want to do it. So you're doing it, but you're not really doing it because you spent too much time forcing your nafs to do something. Forcing your kids to do something only works when they're really, really young, when they don't understand reason. You don't run around with the scissors. You can't, put the fork into the electrical outlet. You can't do certain things they can't. But when they get older, you have to move on to the third stage. The third stage is marhalat al-rida, is acceptance. The nafs still doesn't like what you're doing, but it gave up. It gave up. It found like you're not listening. It keeps on telling you, I don't want to do this, I don't want to, but you keep on doing it. So it's silent now. Fine. We have to do this, I'll do it. It's not happy about it, but it stops putting up a fight. The nafs stops fighting you on it. And some people have achieved that in acts of worship, in salah. They don't have a fight anymore. They're not enjoying it, but they don't feel that they have to fight their nafs to get up and do it. They don't feel that they have to fight their nafs to fast or to pray or to read Quran. Their nafs has accepted that this is the reality. This is how it is. I don't like it, but that's how it is, and I'm too tired, and I've given up trying to fight this person off it. What happens in these situations? It's the next step. It's a good step to arrive at. But if you stay there too long, things habitualize in a boring manner. Meaning actions lose their purpose, lose their function, lose their benefit, because they're being done in a boring manner. So we're not taking anything, we're not actually benefiting from them anymore. And there are a lot of people who live like that. Most people live in the first two stages, by the way, either complete submission to nafs or forcing it to do things it doesn't like. But if you're lucky enough to arrive at doing something at the point where your nafs is not putting up a fight anymore, then good, that's a good place, but you can't stay there forever either. We do that a lot outside of acts of worship as well. When you get up and go to school, or you just do it. You just wake up in the morning. You're waking up in the morning. You don't want to, but you get up. You get out of bed. You get dressed. You leave the house. Your nafs doesn't fight you on these things anymore. At a certain age, it just happens. It's the habit. That's how things have been for a very long time. You've been doing it long enough that the nafs stops fighting you on it. And when you're younger, it's hard to get up. Oh my God, getting out of the bed was the worst thing in the world when you were younger. So difficult. When you get older, it's fine. It's no big deal because you've been doing it long enough. The nafs is just quiet now. It just gave up. See, the nafs can be, you can't tire it out. You can outlast it because it's short-fused. Like I said, short-sighted, short-fused. But it's very important because the instincts keep us alive. But you can outlast it easily. So the third stage is when the nafs just stops putting up a fight. Doesn't mean that you've achieved perfection yet. You're far from it. You can easily habitualize all your actions, and they can lose any true meaning, and they can become just a shell with no substance in them because there's no joy in them. Which takes me to the fourth and final stage, which is marhalat al-hubb wal-itmi'nan. When you find love and you find pleasure and joy and calmness in what you do. It's when the nafs convictions change. The third one, it's stopped fighting you, but doesn't believe that doing salah is of any benefit for it. It still feels there's no self-interest for it there, so it doesn't want to do it, but it's not fighting you anymore. Fine, we're going to do it, whatever you want. This fourth stage, which is it's the real shift. It is the actual, it's that moment of, it's when the light shines, when you're able to convince the soul that this is what's best for you. This is what will allow you to survive and give you joy. You convince it that this is where your joy and this is where your survival exists. And then the nafs will start to want it. Just like it wanted not to do it, it's going to start wanting to do it. You've actually been able to change your convictions to the point where your nafs, you didn't change its instincts. It still wants you to survive and find joy, but now you've convinced it that salah, siyam, good deeds, helping others, being selfless is what's going to offer you survival and joy. You convinced it, so now it wants these things. That's why the Prophet ﷺ would say, وَجُعِلَتْ قُرَّةُ عَيْنِي فِي الصَّلَاةِ. And the cool of my eye exists in prayer. Meaning, my happiness is in prayer. أَرِحْنَا بِهَا يَا بِلَالِ. Ya Bilal, come, خلصني. You're taking too much time. Make adhan so we can, iqamah so we can finally find calmness and happiness in prayer. Now you're like, well, I don't understand what that means. I just want to get through the motions as quickly as possible. Yeah, because you're still in maybe level, stage 2 or 3. Either you're forcing it or you've just turned it into a habit. The nafs stops fighting you. But you need to make that transition where the nafs wants to do this. It finds it. The Prophet ﷺ tells us, لا يؤمن أحدكم. You don't have full iman. حتى يكون هواه تبعا لما جئت به. Until your self-desires, your hawa, are aligned with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded us to do. And it is doable. And that is the nafs al-mutma'innah. In the Quran, nafs al-mutma'innah, the calm nafs, is the nafs that now convictions have changed. It believes that all these good deeds, all these actions that are helpful are within itself, its interest. It's serving its interest. Because it's always going to want to serve its interest of survival and joy. It's never going to want to stop doing that. But you just been able to convince it that this is where it lies, not there. Not looking at haram. That's why, I'll give you an example. People who stop smoking, if they still look back at the days of smoking, oh, those were the days. Oh, what I'd do for a cigarette. You didn't make the transitions properly. You're just in, you were in the first stage where you're just doing whatever the nafs wanted. You're smoking to relieve stress. Then you move to the second stage where you're like, no, that's wrong. I'm forcing my nafs to stop doing it. In order to actually get rid of this addiction, you have to move to the fourth, where you look back at smoking. That was horrible. Those were the worst days. I can't believe I did that. I can't believe I did that. I don't want, you want to go back? No, I don't want to go back to it. I would like to remove that from my history. Because now the nafs doesn't see smoking to be joy and survival. You've convinced it that no, this is actually, it's not enjoyable, it's not survival. Here's joy. Here's joy. Here's where you'll find joy, something different. And we'll talk about those inshallah a bit more. Same thing goes for every act. And you can force yourself not to perform zina for a very long time. See, forcing not only is doing good things, but to force it not to do bad things. You can force yourself not to do zina. But how long can that last? How long can it last that you don't force yourself? You're doing everything before, you're looking at haram, listening to haram, but you're not actually doing it. You're forcing yourself, but don't you think at some point you're going to tire out? What if your nafs outlasts you? And then la samahallah, you fall into this ma'asiyah. Because you spent so much time in that second stage of just forcing it. You have to move to the stages later. That no, I don't want zina. I don't want haram. Where you're disgusted from the concept of zina and you find your joy in halal. You find your joy. You find pleasure in engaging in halal, not haram. Haram is something that is beneath, it's disgusting to you. You can arrive at that. It's not abnormal, it's not weird. I know you're like, I've never heard of that, because most people don't make these transitions to these stages. But if you lived with the Sahaba back in the day, that was the norm. They were disgusted from haram. If you talked about, what are you doing? It's not something, I would love to, but we can't. No, that's not how they were. They weren't looking at drugs and alcohol wishing that they could do it. No, they didn't wish because it's haram, it's disgusting. I don't want it. It's not the path of ease. I want to be on the path of ease. My nafs wants to be on the path of ease to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's not the path of ease, so it's disgusted of it. It's disgusted from that type of behavior. The nafs, it takes time to convince it, but you can. I've already gone on beyond my limit of time, and Brother Khalid is staring at me. So I'm going to end, inshallah, with that. And tomorrow we'll be talking about some strategies, and we'll give more examples and explain on how we can start making those steps, inshallah. I hope that was beneficial. Please put any comments or questions on the actual video link on Facebook page, and all the questions I get and all the inquiries I will, inshallah, in the Q&A session, try and answer and address for you, and I'll try to address them even within the halaqat if the question comes early enough, inshallah, so that this is beneficial for everybody in one way, and any feedback is welcome, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair. Subhanakallah wa bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala nabiyyina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Jazakumullahu khairan wa barakallahu feekum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.